I'm Dan Bennett, Director of Infrastructure here at Sentry IO. And so for those who don't know what Sentry does, we aggregate and report on errors and performance so developers can resolve problems more quickly. Our focus is really on the developer side of the house and making sure that a dev can get in and get the information they need. And so, Sachin?
Yeah, my name is Sachin, and I'm a tech lead at Cloudflare for the API team. So if you've ever interacted with Cloudflare through the dashboard or through the API and made a request, one of those requests has probably gone through something that my team helps maintain and run. And for folks that aren't aware, Cloudflare is sort of like a CDN and security and performance platform for other companies and provides DDoS mitigation and other cool features. Yeah.
Excellent. So one of the questions that someone might have right now is why am I talking to someone from Cloudflare? And the reason for that is, well, everyone knows Cloudflare. And so we're interested in how they build their software. Sentry, as I mentioned before, is all about the developer experience. And we did a survey a bit ago with SREs. I think about 140 people were surveyed, just asking kind of what are some of the challenges with resolving issues as they happen. And one of the bigger problems that was cited is actually code ownership. Like if something is broken, who owns the product or the space in order to fix it? And a lot of companies have solved this problem, and Sentry is already on its same path, but they've solved the problem by using you build it, you run it, or self-service sort of mindsets to make sure that the team who builds the software is also able to support that software. A lot of companies are already shifting over in this direction. About 52% of the SREs that responded said that they were actually already in that environment. But there are a lot of companies that still need to catch. I believe this is the way forward. We're doing it ourselves. And as it turns out, Cloudflare has already done it. And so we want to talk to Sachin about the history of how Cloudflare got to that, as well as some of the things that they've seen and experienced through that process. So first question then is, yeah, how did Cloudflare arrive at you build it, you run it? Who kicked it off? What was it like before that? And what was the process like?
So I was trying to think about a story that had material impact at Cloudflare and really like shifted the needle in big ways. And so to start out, it wasn't like this, right? Back when I first joined, everyone sort of owned everything. And one of the issues with that is when everyone owns everything, no one owns anything. And so if you have too much ownership over a thing across the board for everything, it's kind of hard to delegate fixing problems or having like this bigger picture view on, who owns this thing? And it's like, well, everyone. And so everyone has competing priorities and different things that they want to fix. And so back, like maybe 4 or 5 years ago, when I first started, the database was sort of like a shared resource, and every team would just put their stuff into the DB cluster, and that was it. And you'd fix your section of things, and overall, there was very little, I guess, ownership over the general health of the DB and the overarching view of how the DB is kind of performing. And so what would happen once in a while is teams would want to add new queries or new features and new things. And so they would do it, but it would affect the overall health because one query would hold up the table and lock the table in place, and many other teams would suddenly start seeing impact and suffering. And so one of the big key things that happened is a lot of folks in engineering saw that as a gap. And then we got a DB team. We slowly started provisioning for a DB team. And the database team now today, like they've revolutionized my life in many ways, in that I don't need to really think about writing bad queries as much, because they implemented something called the DB query killer, which makes the DB defensive and ends up killing the any queries that are hurting other teams. And so they're sort of this guardian against other teams affecting other teams, and you still have ownership over your slice of stuff, but they make sure that doesn't bleed out into impact for other teams. And another really cool thing that happened is now, because they had we had freed up like CPU and other things, they could take chunks of the database and move it into your own cluster, your own space, and then you could run it with even more ownership and even more freedom. And then you would have your like faster indexes and this and that. And so um, that went so having this ambiguous ownership model was just somewhat where we started. And then today everything is more structured, and there's definitely this segmentation between platform teams that do, basically the idea of this talk is like, the platform teams that provide the platform that then the application teams can sort of hook into. And so that DB story really was something I called back, that was like a memory that I remember my life was impacted because I no longer got paged for DB, just someone running a bad DB query, right? And I didn't know how to fix that. I was like, well, I don't know where this query is running. I have no context over what is happening. And then the DB team stepped in, and it would just kill the query automatically. No one got paged, and that team would see that, oh, actually we're running some bad queries, and they would get metrics back about that and have the ability to fix those queries themselves, even before it was an incident or something else kind of broke. And so that's where we've gotten to today, which I think is a much better spot than that initial shared ownership model.
Okay. And so a lot of our respondents, 62% said that, ownership of the code itself is a problem. Like something breaks, how do you identify the owner of that code? And so you've described, splitting out the database as a great starting point and a way to shield runtime impacts from each other. But what about the code? How did ownership start to evolve at Cloudflare around the code itself?
So, well, one of the big buzzwords is microservices, right? And initially also, just like the DB was a monolith, there's many services at Cloudflare that started out being one service or one big monolith. And identifying ownership in these monoliths is very hard because, you touch something, but someone else is using same piece of code, same piece of reusing a class, many different things. And so one of the things we've pushed for over the years is telling people not to add things to the monolith and enforcing that as well, where, if you have an endpoint or you have things that are specific to your service, or you do a thing different from whatever is happening in the monolith, go make your own service. And those are some of the tools that we do provide people. So we give people the ability to spin up services pretty easily in Kubernetes, and then allow them to do sort of manage network policies so that you can automatically just allow list certain services. And so you could talk to the database, you could talk to Kafka, you could talk to these other things, and you just apply them to your cluster and your service can spin up easily. Versus you then having to kind of figure out, how do I hook into this monolith? And so by giving people an alternate, better method of spinning up services and code, you kind of incentivize them to break up into their own service. And one easy way to then determine who owns what is, well, which namespace does this service live in? And that's a very clear indication of, well, if it says API team, then it's most likely owned by the API team, versus if it says monolith and something breaks and the whole world gets paged, you're like, well, who really owns this big piece of code in the monolith? And that becomes like a harder problem to solve at that point.
Okay. Interesting. So how does this really work day to day? Like if you were to describe someone coming in, and if I think of, a large enough code base, there's still interconnectivity, right? So sometimes there are edges where it's hard to clearly say this belongs to this person or that. Um, what does a developer experience when they are working in this manner, at least at Cloudflare?
Well, so in general, the boundaries or the edges that you want to kind of define um, relate to them reinventing the wheel. So in terms of some baseline functionality, you want to provide things that services generally rely on, like error reporting and logging and monitoring and uh, network policies and load balancing and all the things that you don't really want the platform teams to be sort of involved in the business logic of that team, right? And so as long as you, so in terms of developer experience, we have, so you spin up uh, most of our stuff is self-serve, so you can go to Kubernetes, ask for a new namespace. You even get your own personal namespace if you want to spin something up. And you can then look at various libraries that we have internal Go libraries or whatever other general language you want to use. We also just recently published our open API schema, so you can kind of reuse that to build whatever SDK you kind of want to also. Um, and you so also, as another side note, the all repositories at Cloudflare are open to everyone else. And so you could start out by cloning some cookie cutter repositories as well. And so you clone them and then you can apply them as defaults to this namespace that you just self-served. And you can start playing around with it. The goal is to get from 0 to 1 as fast as possible. And then you kind of have your business logic stuff. Getting to hello world is sort of the thing you're trying to get to as fast as possible. And so from a platform perspective, providing those tools, we have certain things like Cloudflare that are command line tools that will just help you connect to the cluster, will help you provision certain things, will help you deploy certain things using Helm in reusable ways and things like that. So you can reuse those charts, reuse those templates. And then, you can kind of go from there and you can pick and choose what you want. Same thing with alerting. You can define and apply alerts to the cluster, and it'll go to our alerting alert manager cluster. And basically, you can say things like, send this to our internal chat, and you can give it a chat room, and it'll ping your chat room if something is sort of broken. Similarly, you can say page this person. And so that's where that owner, like you're putting yourself or you're putting your team's ownership and the stamp onto the things you're building as you're building them. And so that sort of clarifies those, instead of just saying, page SRE when this breaks, you kind of say, no, page me or page my team or page this schedule. And that allows for this own baked in. When I say some of this ownership stuff is baked into the steps and the things that we do, that's kind of where some of this stuff comes in, because you're doing all these things and you're adding your stamp onto each step as you're doing them.
Okay, excellent. So, making it simple to identify who to page, first of all, it kind of concerns me. Could see someone just putting my name in everywhere. But other than that, how did you arrive at these sort of the selection of things that are default versus configurable? And do you have any best practices that kind of fell out of all of this automation work that you've done?
Yeah. So one of the things that I think is important to clarify is you can't really tell people to do best practices, right? Like you can't tell devs, hey, program it this way or write it this way. Most of the time, that'll maybe work. But if you really want to make a difference and push the needle in a way that you continue building in that direction, and it doesn't fall off, and then you have a bunch of tech debt and things aren't working the way you thought they would, you have to automate some of these things. And at least personally, and I know a few other devs as well, we all run on these little dopamine hits, right? You kind of see a little checkbox, or you see a little spinning build, and suddenly it's green, and you're like, yes, I can merge my PR, I can release my thing to production, and you see it, and you get that little win for the day, and you're like, yes, like I got this done. And that's way more satisfying in general than someone, there's a mandate that goes out that says you can only use this version of Go, or this version of whatever, and you can only program in this way. You can do that. Maybe people will listen, maybe they won't. And so in general, the best practices that come out are like the things that work for you, the things that speed up developer productivity. So for example, you don't want to think about things that are trivial, like formatting, linting. You want those kind of things to just be there by default. So as an example, when someone provisions a build at Cloudflare, they can just put in a build test or build lint, and those things will run the linter and the testing framework and things like that. And that allows teams to get away from having to spin their wheels on like building all the deployment pipelines, building all the things. And so in terms of best practice, there's many general best practices out there, and so the baseline trivial ones are definitely the ones that you want to automate away. Now, maybe you're running some like nuanced, complicated system that needs load testing in some strange way. And those are the pieces that, even though you have your baseline testing, you want teams to be able to say, well, I need to run this really heavy load test for whatever reason. And you shouldn't make it excessively hard for them to change that default build. And so giving them the ability to still do that, and then enforcing that, did you still run your base test? Did you still run your lints? Did you still run all the baseline stuff? And one other big thing is, by having that little flexibility, teams generally end up learning from each other. So the code is all open, right? So if I see a cool build day to day, I end up going and looking at their build pipeline and their build code, and I just I copy paste it, and I'm like, hey, this is actually really cool, I want to run it on my system too. And so those best practices will develop over time. Enough teams will do that suddenly are like, oh, we should pay attention to this, we should actually add this in as a baseline test, or like a baseline thing for other teams. Many teams seem to be reusing it. So the moment you see teams sort of like spinning their wheels, like reusing things, pulling things out, it's a good time to adopt that as a best practice then, and go from there.
Full transparency, we've obviously talked before, and in that conversation, you mentioned subject matter experts being something that have caused problems along this way. And it was an interesting conversation. So would you mind kind of going over that a little bit?
Yes. So I generally dislike the term subject matter experts. I think it should be sort of subject matter groups or subject matter teams. There's this general, curse that kind of follows you, where if you write a piece of code, you've now owned it forever. And you might not even work at that company anymore. You've moved out of the country, and you still own that code for whatever reason. And so it prevents devs from being open with writing certain pieces of code, because it has them think about, well, oh man, I'm going to own this forever, and I don't know if I want to be that subject matter expert. And one of the things that happens over time is it restricts what the team can actually end up doing. And in terms of, so let's say this person wants to just take a break for a bit and go on vacation, and you have an incident or you have something that kind of breaks, and now you have to reach out to this person. And also, full transparency, I've done this in the mountains of Peru and like on the beaches of Hawaii, back when we did have these concentrated subject matter experts and you had to jump on and like fix the thing. But over time, what's happened is, uh, one of the things that I try to do is pair with people as much as possible, um, because it prevents this consolidation of knowledge in one human, and you can kind of balance it out with at least another person. And on a screen, and you're like, "Can you see my screen? Can you hear me?" You drop off, and but you kind of push through that, and you keep going so that you can share this knowledge. And another thing that kind of works really well is, if you've built a system, the next time there's a bug or a feature addition, don't do it. Even if uh, there's a timeline, there's a thing, find someone who doesn't know anything about the system, and then pair with them. And then suddenly now the next time they can be the person and pair with someone else. And with that sort of spread of knowledge, you have the ability to give back the power to the systems themselves. So instead of people sort of running and having to document and know these systems, the systems kind of become. There's this phrase, I don't really like it as much because I love my pet, but it's changing your pets to cattle. And that's what you kind of want to do with some of these services too. Is anytime someone looks at a service, they're like, oh yeah, I've seen this cow before, like it's fine. It's not like this really niche nuanced pet that now you suddenly have to dig into and learn about. Yeah, so if you take anything away from this talk, it's definitely introduce pairing into your culture. It helps with all of these things, right? Like ownership is shared, and you have another person, and it allows them to sort of take a break, or it allows them to share that knowledge. And mentally also, it's less taxing. You're not sitting there alone chipping away at this code for days at a time. You have a thought partner that you're bouncing ideas off of, and you're like, hey, like, what do you think of this? And they're like, oh no, actually that's not, we shouldn't do it that way, we should do it this way. And you have good disagreements or good agreements. And but if you're working in a silo, you think everything's a great idea. And that's how we get systems that are a great idea for one person, right? And so
Okay, excellent. So a couple of things there. You mentioned previously, like the dopamine hit of accomplishment, as well as how much you love your pets. So how do you emotionally go through that process of building something and let it go? So like I still love that soap service I wrote back in 2002. It's my friend. So like for you, what do you do to kind of not invest and have that emotional connection to the things you're building?
So, I mean, that's a great question. I think the answer is hard. And the answer is you think of your team, and you understand that. So at Cloudflare also, we have this idea of giving away your Legos. And the way I like to think about it is, you can have one big Lego and build something with two blocks on it. Or you sort of break that Lego up into teenier parts, and you give that away. And then you can build more interesting shapes. You can build more nuanced structures, even probably stronger structures than the original just block of Lego. And that it hurts because you're basically breaking apart this Lego, and you're like, oh, this is my Lego. And humans want to own things, right? And humans want to say that I built this and this is mine. uh, and that's cool. That is that ownership process of like, this is my baby and I want to care and feed the system, and I love it. But sometimes it's also good to recognize that I'm on this team, and I share ownership with this team, and I have responsibility towards this team in order to let this thing go. And that like it's an up and down. But the moment you do the pairing process and you see someone else shine with that service or the thing that you built, and they're like, hey, I figured out that this is kind of a gap and I made it better. um, because what you've, like you said, you're so emotionally attached that sometimes you refuse to see the gaps, right? You refuse to see um, things that you maybe dropped off. But by exposing other minds to it, it makes the service stronger and makes things more diverse and just more fun. Like I've built services where someone else has looked at it and been like, hey, I made this better and this better and this, and I'm really excited about that because it's something I wrote and thought was a good idea, and someone added a better idea on top of that. And so you get to learn about the better idea. You get to pair with this person. You get to talk to them about why your thing might have been a bad idea. And the end goal is for us to all grow, right? Not to just hold on to some piece of tech that we've learned. And yeah, so the answer is it's hard, but do it and it's worthwhile. The end goal is to all grow together, and that works pretty well.
Yeah, you spoke with some excitement there about it. Would you say that this model has in any way improved like your enjoyment of writing software and developing software and working with your teammates? Neutral? What are your, how does it feel?
Absolutely. We have a quarterly team retro, and one of my bullet points is more pairing every single time. And the reason being, hard things have happened, and in the office we would pair by default. You'd have a problem, you'd walk over to someone's desk, and they would type some stuff out on your screen, or would hook their monitor into yours, and you'd suddenly be pairing simultaneously. And that doesn't happen at all anymore, where there's no natural permeation of this pairing or idea sharing. And so you really have to force it. And my fear in the next few years is that we are going to become these silos of knowledge where someone does just build out a system, in their room all by themselves, and then we stop understanding each other's mindset, each other's general goals. And so at least, like, I would have, like a multiple pairing situation if it's possible, but a pair entails two right now. So you can only kind of have that one-on-one pairing conversation. I hope that gets solved in the future in some way. But if my most productive times and my most interesting ideas have always come from even just rubber ducking with someone else and just saying, what just talking through your idea with another human, and they're like, oh wait, that was interesting, go back to that. Like, and humans are social creatures, and so at least in terms of chemically what's happening in my brain, I'm happier and more excited when I'm definitely pairing with someone else. And so that has improved my overall pairing health and or programming health, and doing it with someone else.
Okay. I mean, it sounds like it's great for the team itself to own something and to work together and own it together in a way that is supportive. What about cross-team interactions? How does this play into how teams will interact with each other?
So that's a really good question. So one of the things that we do at Cloudflare is have certain chunks of organizations, sort of like mini organizations. And so my team is part of the control plane organization. And the control plane organization will align on some sort of central goal for the year or the quarter, be it, let's shut down an old service, or let's try to be more resilient. And so these broader level, higher level concepts. And we go to these shared meetings with other teams to talk about these common goals. And so that's one piece of interaction that ends up happening, where there's alignment on some general bigger goal, and you can then pair with cross team people on those alignments of bigger goals, saying, hey, I'm looking for this new type of auth, and I don't fully understand how this works. And you go to the auth team and you're like, can you help me understand how this works, and maybe we can build something together. There's also infrastructure related groups like the Redis team. And so you could go to a Redis meeting and contribute, saying, hey, I discovered this cool thing with Redis, which has actually happened many times, and other teams benefit from that. But they're like, oh, it's just a flag. Okay, I'll turn it on. And then they end up turning it on as well. But definitely having certain alignments helps to have that cross-functional pairing as well.
Awesome. Great. Looks like we're at time.
We still have a few questions. I just wanted to address a couple of questions that we got in the Q&A. So we do have a few minutes, so like 10 minutes approximately. So there's a few things. So I'll start with the kind of, we'll go back to the latest one. First, how do you pair with a slow performing or a partner that is not in your own velocity?
So this happens all the time, right? Not everyone is on the same level by definition of what we do at a company. Not like a new member joins the team, and now everything about the service, and they sort of don't. And the one thing that really helps there is to pair someone who knows everything with someone who doesn't know everything. And the most amount of growth, or the fastest growth, happens when there's the biggest difference. So what we do on our team is when we get a new hire or someone who's new, we actually pair them with someone who is similar to them in their interests. So maybe they really want to work on the core API. Maybe they want to work on parts of the DB. And so we figure out, like, okay, if you wanted to grow in a certain section, what is it that you would want to grow in? And so part of it could be, I've had people say, well, I really want to learn how to optimize the DB. And I really want to learn how to analyze when I run a query, what happens. And so then on the team, we go find out the person who knows the most about that. And you then pair them up. And that difference in velocity and the difference in that, so the trajectory kind of increases, because this person has the interest, but not the knowledge. And then this person has the knowledge. And suddenly they're like, oh, that's where I want to go. That's where I want to be. I see what that person is doing. And that really just immediately at least like gets them on par. And I've seen this work many times. So if you have someone who is of different velocity, figure out their interests first, because you don't want to just pair someone who knows everything and a new person, and they're like, hey, I know everything about this thing. And they're like, I don't even know what that, like, I'm not really interested in that. And so that is a harder challenge to kind of solve.
Do you think that there's kind of two kinds of pairing? One is the kind of mentorship pairing, and one is the ownership pairing. So that, if you want to kind of expand the ownership to other people, they should be more or less on the same level. Do you agree on this? Or
yes. So in general, we have this new hire buddy program. And so the new hire buddy program does actually try to suss out, like, hey, like, what are your goals in like 30 days, 60 days, 90 days? What are the sections that you feel you kind of want to grow in? And it's more of like this ongoing process, right? And it's and that's how you get them to get to that place of growth. And then in terms of the ownership pairing, you generally do want someone who is on an equal playing field, but in situations where their velocity is not great, the idea is that you still allow for them to grow in those spaces. So the idea is that if they come in with that less velocity sometimes, like maybe you wrote the system, right? And now you need to add a feature, and they don't know anything about it. And so the empathy is like a big thing here, in that you sit with them, and and also being like legit with your manager or the timeline, saying, hey, look, this is the reality of the situation. We have someone who really wants to learn about this system, and I know everything about the system, but I don't want to continue working on this, because I think that ownership needs to spread out to other teams. And most managers, if they know what's good for their team, will say, sounds like a good idea, right? And so that definitely balances that piece out as well. And so like, look for don't think of it as a negative, but look for this difference in velocity, because you're trying to have people be on same velocities across the board in general. And so if someone has lots, like if they're not on the same level as everyone else, figure out why. Like, go talk to them and be like, hey, what's happening with this? Like, do you need to pair on this? Like, can we like, is there any way we can help out? So
a lot of practical tips there. Thanks for that. Anything, Dan, that you want to add on this topic?
No, not necessarily, but I do agree. Like, you want to look for those opportunities to close the gap in skills and velocity. And the difference between ownership pairing and mentorship pairing, in my experience, is very fluid. You might be the mentee at some point, depending on the conversation you're having, and you don't expect it.
We have a lot of things like that when we take on new technologies like Crossplane, for an example. In the recent couple of years, it's been something where more senior people have come to a group. We have this group led by one of our engineers where they are completely noobs, because it's really a new kind of a paradigm. But hey, let's do another question. So, do you allow devs to create full pipelines? How do you enforce governance on, say, some mandatory security scanning that should not be turned off?
There's many compliance things, right? Like that. Not a lot of devs love. It's just stuff that you have to do. There's like various governance or government oversight authority things. The goal there should always be to sort of allow them to keep doing what they're like. Don't break their pipeline unnecessarily. But the one thing that's really nice about Kubernetes or any sort of cluster orchestration thing is you could spin up a scanner, or you could spin up something that goes and looks at the end product and says, hey, I see that you're running this strange container, or like a strange thing here. Make sure you're updating your containers and things, and give them enough. I think the biggest thing here is like enough heads up and upfront honesty, where a lot of the issues I see in tech is like everything is urgent all the time. And if that's not the case, like, say it isn't so, right? And you can allow them to work on whatever needs to happen. And then another interesting thing that comes up usually is around secrets and secrets management and things like that.
Yeah.
And developers, for some reason, are very attached to their secrets, and they want to like keep their secrets and things like that. And Kubernetes allows for sort of ephemeral secrets. So you put the secret in, and then you never touch it ever again. And the goal of it is to sort of be able to optimize for rotation rather than optimizing for having the secret or keeping the secrets like safe. So the assumption is that you are going to breach compliance. The assumption is that you are going to leak your secrets. Your servers are going to go down. And how do you handle those situations when that, and the quicker, like, because it's like the world is impossible to plan, right? There's chaos everywhere, and data breaches happen now more than ever. Things new compliance reports come out. And so you want that agility and teams to move freely within these pipelines, and giving them the tools to also do the thing where they're not breeding like pets, but they have this cattle of secrets where they're like, okay, roll the secret, we don't care, or update this container, does not matter, do the compliance thing, whatever, it's fine. And so being okay with rolling forward rather than it's like this big disastrous urgent thing that you now really have to do.
True that.
Yeah.
Hi, we're from Effico, the proud organizer of the DevOps conference.
Our goal is to uncover cutting-edge talks, emerging ideas, and DevOps trends, providing a global forum for practitioners and decision-makers to learn and grow.
We would love to also explore how we can help you excel in DevOps together. Visit us at effico.com and enjoy the inspiring talks at the DevOps conference.